Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Jared. I'm excited to be with you this morning. Today, we are talking about the word content. What does it mean to be content? How can we be content? You probably have a list of things that you would say, I cannot be content because of these things. About 5 years ago, I was doing something, lifting a couple of things, and I was walking, and I thought that someone came up behind me and stabbed me in the back, literally. And I was carrying these things, and I turned around because I thought somebody stabbed me, and it was just, I was 26, and my back started hurting, was all the problem was. And from then on, I stopped lifting those things and went back to work and was sitting in my chair, and I was sitting in my chair in kind of a off-center, sideways way, and somebody came in my office like, "Are you okay?" Like, "Yeah, I feel fine." Like, "Why are you sitting that way?" "I don't know." And I didn't think I was sitting anyway, but apparently I was sitting in a way that made me a little off kilter, a little off center, because that was the only way I could sit with any amount of comfort. And I was okay, and then I went home that night and, was like, man, I don't know what I did. This is so odd. I've never had this problem before. And didn't get into the chiropractor for a little bit. And I remember the first night I had that back problem, and I just couldn't find a spot or a place on the pillow that would let me sleep. And I remember trying to find a chair that I could sit in, a place on the couch that I could sit and just be comfortable. And I think that that's where we all want to live. We all want to live in a place that's comfortable and content and happy. And the question I want to ask this morning is, how can we be content when everything is not okay? How can we be content when everything in our life is not okay? The crazy thing about being content is that every person in this room, not one person would have the same definition of the word content. For some of you, you're going to be alone on a beach. For some of you, you're going to be together with a big group of people in a mountain. Some of you are going to be in your home. Some of you are going to be far from your home or the people in your home. Some of you are going to be with a big party. Some of you are going to be all alone doing one thing. We would all define being content differently. Some of you being content means that everything is done. The yard work got done, the laundry got done and folded and put away, the house is clean, everything's good, the bills are paid. That's what being content looks like. And some of you are like, that reminds me I need to go do those things. Why? Because that's not where contentment comes from for you. We would all define it differently. I remember when I was in school and I had an economics class, and that economics professor described economics as limited or scarce resources spread among people's unending wants and desires. And it just made me realize we'll never be content. We always have more want. And I think it's easy to see in hindsight. We look back and go, man, I was really content in that season. I was surrounded by friends, or things were going really good at work and everything was going well. But sometimes we look back and go, man, I was really not content in that season. I was really chasing after something. I just couldn't get enough. I have 3 boys, and my oldest is 5, and he's perpetually looking for the next thing that he can have for his birthday. He could have just had his birthday, and he's still going to see something at Target and say, "Dad, can we take a picture of that? And then when my birthday comes, can you get me that for my birthday?" It's like, "But your birthday's in October, and it's January." But sure. And my wife took a trip with my son, and I was looking at the pictures on her phone from the trip. And randomly, they're doing fun things. They're seeing some family, and randomly there's a picture of a toy dragon. I was like, "Oh, birthday present." She said, "Yep, that's what that is." There's always something. The list of things that my son wants is like 40 things. Why? Because the list of things that we want and we think we need are unending. And sometimes when you think about the word content, it feels unattainable. Can I even get there? Is it even a possibility for me, given my past, given how much I've hurt, given how much I've given hurt or received hurt, or the trauma that I've been through, or the family situation that I'm in? Can I have contentment? Because there's always something, whether it's material, whether it's success, whether it's just being busy and having something to do with your hands. Maybe being content for you means that someone knows you and still chooses to love you. That maybe being content is just keeping people at arm's reach, because if they really know you, then you won't be content anymore because they won't really love you. Well, we're in Philippians 4 this morning, and Paul gives us an insight. He calls it a secret to being content. We're in Philippians 4 if you want to turn there. And while you're turning there, I'll tell you, Paul's writing Philippians from a jail cell. And he's writing it to a group of people in Philippi that sent him a gift. They sent him something. And what you read in Philippians is he's thankful for them because they've sent him something. He's thankful for them because they've done. So he's encouraging them. He's challenging them to do more good things. But at the end, he's kind of saying, oh, and thank you for all these things. And he's thanking some specific people. And I want you to read verse 10. He says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. So what happened is he's sitting in jail, and jail for them was a little bit different. They didn't have a state-run organization that would feed them, house them, clothe them. They would basically lock them in a jail cell and hope that someone that they know or love would give them what they need to survive. So your friends and family would bring you water and food. So Paul's sitting there and he's thinking, okay, I know all these churches. Maybe they don't know where I'm at. He's writing them letters. And he didn't get anything from this church for a while, but then he did. So he's telling them, hey, I know that you didn't for a little bit, but now you did, and I'm thankful for that. And honestly, what he writes here about contentment honestly feels like a little bit of a prepositional phrase. He could have cut it off and left it out, but it's left into the scriptures, and it gives us such a deep insight to what contentment is and how we can each possess it. So I want you to look in verse 11, Philippians 4. He talks about, hey, thank you for sending me a gift. It's so great. Philippians 4:11, he says, not that I'm speaking of being in need. He almost starts this kind of run-on sentence of like, hey, thank you for your gift, but not that I'm in need, I'm okay. For I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. He says, there's two things that stand out to me in this first verse. The first one is he says, for I've learned in whatever situation to be content. You ever just meet somebody and it's like, man, they're just happy in whatever situation they're in. And that's just wild. I can't get over it. They're upset. Something that would upset me happens to them and they're fine. Something bad happens to them, they still got a smile on their face. Something interesting happens, they're still good. There's confusion in their life, they don't know everything, they don't know the answer, they're still good. Paul's not saying, hey, some people are just naturally content. He's saying it can be learned. One of my favorite things about having young kids is having friends with young kids. And it's funny because, guys, kids are weird. Kids do weird stuff. One of my boys, my youngest, he's 1.5, and he just puts whatever he's eating, the entire thing has to go in his mouth. And he doesn't care what it is. He doesn't care how big it is. He doesn't care the consistency. Whole thing just gets popped in his mouth. And one of my favorite things to say to my kids' friends, their parents, is when somebody does something weird and pops the whole thing in their mouth, you say, hey, that's learned behavior. They saw that somewhere and they mimicked it. And it's just kind of funny, something to say, because kids are both. Kids do things that they do naturally, and kids do things that they see. But I like to pin it to like, hey, they learned that from somewhere. That weird thing that they're doing, that funny dance that they're doing, they saw a parent do that, and now they're replicating that behavior, right? Now, that's a silly thing, but what Paul's saying here is that, hey, being content can be learned behavior. We don't just have to look at our situation and go, yeah, I'll never be content. I can't be content. Look how bad it is. I can't be happy where I'm at. Look at this situation. I can't be content here. I won't be content until we get out of the house. I won't be content until the kids get out of the house. I won't be content until we can go take the vacation. I won't be content until I can achieve the thing. I won't be content until I get the promotion. I won't be content until I get the car. I won't be content until, and then we say fill in the blank, but what is that? And he says, I've learned, the other thing that stood out to me is in whatever situation. There's not a caveat there. He says, in any situation, I've learned to be content. And we look at that and we go, okay, did he just not get it? Did he just not understand the depth of where problems can lie? Like Paul's sitting in a jail cell, and sometimes I listen to Paul talk, and I'm convinced that somebody needs to come up to him and be like, Paul, you're in a jail cell. Maybe he just doesn't fully understand the depth of the problem, and he needs someone to come next to him and say, Paul, you don't have a whole lot of hope to get out. Like, stop writing such hopeful words because things aren't looking up. But Paul understands where he's at. And he still chooses to have this attitude. He still says, hey, I've learned to be content in whatever situation that I'm in. And maybe we go, okay, Paul just didn't understand how things can be in 2022. He didn't understand that I can hop on my phone and literally see what anyone in the world is posting on their Facebook or posting online. I can literally go and see the best food, the best places, the best things. And I know that I am missing out on those things. He just didn't understand it. Well, you have to look at the life of Paul. Paul had a crazy life. I mean, you look at his life and he was someone who had done everything the right way. And Christians were coming along and not doing the same things that he was doing because he was following what he believed was the straight and narrow, trying to follow all the rules. And when Christians came along and they're saying, hey, it was Jesus, it's just Jesus, he's saying, no, it's the law too. So he was taking them and saying, I'm going to put you in jail. I'm going to persecute you. I'm going to harm you because you're not doing the things that I think you should do. And then God met him in a miraculous way and his life changed absolutely forever. But his life did not get easier when that happened. His life got more difficult. But his life became more hope-filled. When you look at the things that happened to Paul, Paul's writing this and he's been shipwrecked. Paul has been abandoned. Paul has been beaten with rods. Paul has gotten lashes with whips in an amount that was supposed to kill people. Pain, and maybe the worst of all, Paul got bit by a snake. I can't stand snakes. And the idea of getting bit by one, I'm out, I'm done, whatever got me into this situation, I'm not doing it anymore. But I want you to read, this is the same guy who read in 2 Corinthians 4:8, he wrote this. Listen to these words that he said. He said, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. And further on he wrote, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Paul had this deep-rooted hope and contentment that was not based on his circumstance. Paul had these difficult situations in his life where he'd been pressed but not crushed, confused but not in despair, in pain but not destroyed. And I get minorly inconvenienced and I wipe my hands of the situation and say, it must not be God's thing for me today. I must not be in the right spot. I guess I'll move on. And I've seen people that have a bad diagnosis. I've seen people that have suffered loss. And not that they're not emotional, not that difficulty doesn't happen and we don't cry real tears and we don't suffer and we don't grieve, but to know that deep down in your heart, God is still good. He's still with me. I still have the thing that is most important. And Paul starts the comparison here to say, listen, when you compare what's happening in this life compared to eternity, it's not even worth comparing. It's not even worth looking at the same thing. So in verse 12, he says this, Philippians 4:12, he says, I know how to be brought low and I know how to abound. He's saying, I know how to live on little. I know how things can be when things are not going well. And when he's writing that, understood in that is his persecution. Understood in that is the difficulty that he's lived his life in. And then he says, I know how to abound. What he's not saying here, hey, to follow Christ is to have nothing. He's not saying that. But listen to this, and he kind of says some of the same phrasing, but he says, in every circumstance, whatever situation, he says, I've learned the secret. There's that word again, I've learned behavior. The secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And I almost hate that he included the word hunger, because as soon as you introduce hunger, I'm done being content. As soon as I'm a little hungry, I'm done. Like even in the word hunger means that you are missing something that is sustaining you. And he's saying I can have hunger and contentment in the same thing, because just because my body wants it doesn't mean it is necessary. And he uses the word secret. And I don't know about you, but anytime someone uses the word secret, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get in a little closer. You said secret, I can see you whispering, and I want to know what you have to say. Even when somebody isn't whispering a secret to me, I'm like, you gonna tell me afterwards? After they tell you, you gonna come tell me? Like, I want to know what that secret is. And Paul says that there is a secret to being content. And as I'm prepping for this, I was looking up on the internet, like, what does the world think about contentment? What does the world think that this secret could be? And I read one list of things that, hey, this is what makes you not content. And the things on the list were ambition, curiosity. That even in those two things, those are good things. And they're saying, hey, if you just kind of squash your curiosity and your ambition, then you'll be a little bit more content. If you're just fine with the status quo, you'll be content. It said that the need for change, somebody that's just restless, they need to move, they need to get to a new job, they need to get a new group of friends, there's always something that needs to change in them, and you end up not being content with where you are. A numbness to the good that's around you. I thought they were onto something there. Because sometimes I think we're not content because we just go, it's fine. One of them was bad company. I do think there's a piece to it. There's a part of that that's true, that the wrong people will drive you to not be content. The aim to please people. If you're constantly trying to please people, then you're not going to be content in whatever's going on in your heart and in your life. But the number one reason across all of what I've read is comparison. Comparison kills contentment. And right now, you probably have something in your pocket that will lead you to compare, whether you think about it or not. Man, they just got to go on vacation. Looked like a nice vacation. I'd love to go on that vacation. Man, he just posted from the inside of his car, and I can tell that is the new Cadillac. And oh my word. Man, I can see they just posted a picture of their family, and their landscaping looks nice. I got to get on mine. Holy cow. I drive out of my driveway. I love my neighbor across the street. He's an awesome retired guy, and he spends hours on his lawn, and it looks beautiful. And I always ask him, like, hey, does your lawn always look a little bit better? The green with contrast to the brown of my grass, does that look a little nicer? And he said, it does. But then he puts it in perspective and says, you have kids. You shouldn't be worried about your grass. My grass is my kids. So he puts it in perspective. But I can't drive out of my driveway without seeing 4 people's lawns that are nicer than mine. And it makes me go, I need to stop at Lowe's and get some seed. I need to go get some fertilizer. We can't help but have this comparison game of, man, that guy, he's working really, really hard. And I don't feel like I've been working very hard lately, so I'm going to work hard now. And I'm going to do what I can do so I'm not seen as less than him. And we end up just comparing everything in the world until we feel so belittled in ourselves that we'll never be content because our standard is the people around us. And honestly, most of the time, it is the people's best versions of themselves. We don't see behind the screen to see how their life really is. And we end up comparing things all the way into a place where we can't be happy. We can't be content. One of my favorite things is the story of Solomon. Solomon was David's son, and Solomon was one of the richest people ever. He was the wisest person that ever walked the earth. I mean, he had a lot of good things going on, but he wrote this book of Ecclesiastes, and in Ecclesiastes, it's kind of this unleashing of his heart. And listen, he was the richest person of all time. And he said these things like, listen, I'm gonna go not deny my heart anything that it wants. Whatever my eye sees, I'm gonna let it happen. I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna do it. So experiences, people waiting on him and serving him, spouses. I mean, he just had everything and anything that anyone could ever want. And the first 3 chapters of this book that he writes, he's explaining, okay, so I thought it was this. I thought it was the acquisition of wisdom. And I got wisdom. And he keeps using this same phrase. He says it was vanity. It's a front. It's a veneer. It's not worth it. And then he says it's like a chasing after the wind. Here's the most wise person to ever walk the earth and probably the richest person to ever walk the earth. And he says, wisdom didn't do it for me. So he moves along and he says, maybe it's stuff and experience. And he says, I built houses and planted vineyards and I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees and I made myself pools. And he just describes everything. And he says he became greater than anyone who had been before him in all of Jerusalem. He's saying, I was the greatest king that had ever been. And what it says is, it's all vanity. It's all striving after the wind. And then he goes on to say, I looked at my life as a wise person. I looked at the unwise person. I said, we're both going to die. And it says it made him feel empty. And then he said, maybe it's about hard work. Maybe it's about toil. And then he said, what I was left with was toil and hard work. And he keeps using this phrase of, it's like chasing after the wind. It's not worth it. Have you ever gotten something and then realized, oh, I thought it was going to be this thing and I kind of forgot about it now. It's April. Does anybody in the room remember what they got for Christmas? Maybe if it was something meaningful and significant to you, maybe you remember what it is, but I can't remember what I got for Christmas, the clothes, the shoes, I can't remember what it was. And at the time I was really hoping for it. I really wanted it. I gave somebody a list and said, man, these are the things that I really want. But here we are 4 months later, almost to the day, and I can't remember anything. Even when you take out comparison, and Solomon had nothing, no one to compare himself to, he says, I still don't get contentment from all those things. One of my favorite quotes, I've quoted it before, is from Tom Brady. Tom Brady, I was a Rams fan. I was 10 when they won the Super Bowl, and Tom Brady broke my heart 2 years later, and then continued to break my heart for the next 20 years. But he did an interview when he was 26. He'd won 3 Super Bowls. He'd just been named Super Bowl MVP. I mean, he would go on in just a couple of years to marry a supermodel. I mean, there's nothing else that any person could have ever said that they want. And this is what he said in the interview. He said, there's times where I'm not the person I want to be. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and think there's still something greater out there for me? I've reached my goal in life. There's got to be more than this. I've done it. I'm 27. What else is there for me? And the interviewer said, what's the answer? And he says, I wish I knew. Paul is standing here saying, I know the secret that Solomon couldn't figure out in Ecclesiastes, that Tom Brady couldn't figure out 20 years ago. And we're left saying, what is the secret? What is the answer? I think a lot of us end up living in this place of contentment, and it's on one end of the spectrum or the other. It's complacency or control. Complacency says, what does it matter either way? It doesn't matter. I'm comfortable where I'm at, so I guess this is contentment. And you probably have a little bit of contrast. There's something going on that you're like, this doesn't feel right. There's confliction. But I'm comfortable today, so I'm going to be fine. If there's a problem, just cover it up. It's complacency. And that's at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, we have control. That side of control says that I will be content when this thing happens. I will be content when fill in the blank. I will be content when I'm in the next stage of life. I'll be content when I don't have kids in diapers. I'll be content when I don't have kids in elementary school. I'll be content when the kids are out. And then you're left going, okay, all those things have been happening, and I'm still left with this lack of contentment. I've been working really hard. I've been trying to do it all on my own, and I'm still not content. What is the problem? What is the secret? And Paul says this in Philippians 12 as we move on. He says, I know how to be brought low. Oh, we already read that. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound in every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And the word that he uses in contentment was this word that said it's not reliant on external circumstances. And that would have just been so anti-cultural. It would have been so confusing to say that, hey, I can be fully satisfied. I can be fully fulfilled. I have everything that I need to be sufficient. And he's not just saying, hey, look inwardly. It's in you. Go find it. He says, I have it. Let me tell you what the secret is, and it's in Philippians 4:13. He says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, this verse has been misquoted quite a bit. But what this verse is saying is that whatever circumstance I'm in, I have the capacity to be content. Why? Because it is God that gives me strength. It's not saying, hey, I will be content when it says I have everything that I need already to be content. It's not reliant on external circumstances, on different influences. It's inwardly satisfied and at rest with where God has you today, regardless of what is happening around you. And I feel like some of us might have Jesus or might have a piece of Jesus, but we don't trust him with our contentedness. We're not willing to hand him the tension in our heart that says, God, I really want a really big house. I really want the nice car. I want the relationship. I want kids. I want all the things. And it's not wrong to have those desires. But it's wrong to put those desires on a pedestal where only Jesus should go. Fulfilled in any situation. And it's not a strength that only came from him. It was a strength that only came from God. Strength comes from new perspective in Christ. Paul talks in 2 Corinthians where we just read, for this light and momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Paul stopped comparing his life on earth to the people around him and started comparing his life to Jesus. And saying it's going to be worth it when I get there. Can you say that about your life, that your life is going to be worth it when you get there? Or are you going to get to heaven one day and say, I missed it. I thought that down there was the whole thing. And I didn't put up away any treasures. I didn't serve. I didn't love the people around me. I wasn't selfless. I wasn't the conduit of God to the people around me like I was called to be, and now I'm left. I made it in, but I missed out on so much. In 2011, I had the opportunity to go on a mission trip to Senegal, Africa. And my church in St. Louis, where I grew up at, had a partner where they would go and do some trips in these villages in Senegal, Africa, and it was an unreached people group. So there were a group of people that knew Christ that were Christians, and then they would go out and share Christ with these villages. And if you've never seen Senegal, Senegal's the westernmost tip of Africa, and Senegal sits like a hand around the Ghana River. It was an English territory where Senegal was a French territory, and the Ghana is along the river. So Ghana sits like this, and Senegal sits like this around it. And where we were going was all the way down here, but you fly all the way up here. So you drive all the way around the Ghana because you can't go through it. So you drive all the way around it, and we landed, and it's this massive city. Dakar. It's this massive, massive city. And then you get in a little van and you drive for 13 hours. We started early in the morning and we finished late at night. And we drove all the way around that country. And I just remember, it is just abject poverty for 13 hours. It's not like you drive past the poor section of town. The whole thing is just abject poverty. And I just remember being there and it's just completely shaken. And we get to the place where we're at, and what you see there is that you'd have a village that would be 10 or 15 sets of huts. And there were these mud huts with thatched straw roofs. And they would kind of build them around these mango trees. And there were maybe 2 or 3 that you'd have a family that would have 2 or 3, grandma, mom, and her, just little sets of families. And then there was this one of like 8. And it was like, okay, what's that? Is that like the town center? And they said, no, that's where the believers live. And what was happening there was that there was a husband and wife that were believers and they had children. But as they were telling people about Jesus, they would tell a family about Jesus and the husband would say no and the wife would say yes. And because they were in their culture, the husband would say, if you follow Jesus, you can't be married to me anymore, and you'd kick them out. And in their culture, they wouldn't have a place to go. They wouldn't have work. So this husband and wife that were believers would take them in. And when there was a child born that had a disability or a child born out of wedlock or in a bad situation, that child would just get left somewhere. And word would travel that child would be left somewhere in this believing couple because they believe that every person has the value because they are imprinted with the image of God. They would go and get these women and these children and people that no one else in the culture saw any value in, and they would say, you can come with us. So around this mango tree, you had 8 huts where all the other ones were 2 or 3. And even the picture of that is that, our hope in Jesus should change us to love the people around us in such a tangible way. But I just remember they had nothing. Same shirt the whole 8 days I was there. But they were happy. They were content. Why? Because they had Jesus. I remember that there was a little boy who had a lot of severe disabilities. And he was everybody's best friend. Kindest little boy, sweet little boy. He'd just kind of follow you along and you'd play with him, play soccer. But all the other kids were like, okay, you don't play soccer with him. And so we'd play with him. And there was a couple that was on our trip. And you got to understand, they just had this community because there were kids and there were women and nothing was perfect, but it just fit with what God had for them. And there was this couple that was on our trip and their heart was just broken for this little boy. And they came and told our group that was on this mission trip, and they said, hey, we don't know what can be done, but we're going to ask if there's a possibility and just start the conversation. Could we ever adopt him? Could we take him to the States and give him the care and treatment that he needs? And so we pray, we don't know what the answer is, so we prayed and we went and talked to, they went and talked to one of the people that helps lead those trips. She's a believer and an interpreter, translator. And they said that they asked her and she just looked perplexed. And she said, he has everything he needs here. He has people that love him. He has people that are going to share Christ with him. What else does he need? That doesn't mean that we don't help people in need. It doesn't mean that we're not a source of good to people who need it. I'm not saying that we just leave and forget. But it put such a perspective in my mind that Paul has. These are light and momentary afflictions in light of eternity. We have everything that we need. And I think at a certain point we have to be so satisfied with Christ that we look at the things in our life. The new clothes, I need God more. The vacation, I need God more. The promotion, I need God more. The comfort, what's going to truly give me comfort and contentment is Jesus. It's Jesus. Jesus had this interaction with a woman who was an outcast from the rest of her society. No one wanted anything to do with her. She'd been married a bunch of times. She wasn't living with a man who was her husband. I mean, her life was not what we would even describe today as good. It was complicated. It was confusing. She had shame wrapped around her life. And Jesus was at a well the same time she was. And they started talking. And he said this phrase, he said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become a spring of water welling up to eternal life." This is the difference. Everything else, all the other cups of water, all of the other things that we put our hope in are not going to fill us up, but Jesus will fill us up. Jesus will fill us up better than anything else we could imagine. It's the living water. Do you have that water? Will you bow your heads? If you're here today and you'd say, "I don't have that living water," he said, "Take my cup and drink." I love Romans because it's so clear. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. If you believe that Jesus did what he said he would do in dying on the cross for your sins, you can be saved. There's a deep-rooted contentment that can be had because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. One of the things that I just can't get out of my mind lately is that God knows you as well as anyone could ever know you, better. And he still chooses to love you. I think that's probably my main concern in life, is that if someone gets to know me, they won't really like me. They won't really love me. I'm not who I say I am. I'm an imposter. I'm a liar. I'm difficult. I'm problematic, I'm annoying. But God sits in heaven, knowing you completely. And he says, "I love you. And you are worth sending my son to die on the cross for you." All you have to do is ask. And if that's you today, I would just ask, fill out a connection card. Go to next steps. Go tell someone. Because Romans 10 says that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, he's the only thing that can give you contentment. He's the only thing that can give you true, lasting peace. And secondly, I would say this to the people that are believers. Can you hold on to the truth of he will give me contentment? And just remember, is this a chasing after the wind? Some truth to hang on to. Is this chasing after the wind? Because there are things in our lives that we think are going to make us happy, but they're going to be chasing after the wind. Jesus is still the only thing that can fully give you contentment. Is there something that you're hanging on to, something that you're hoping for, that you need to open your hands and say, "God, you could bring it to me, you could not bring it to me. I'm still trusting that you are good either way." Let's pray and then we'll respond and sing. God, we love you. We're thankful that you bring contentment better than anything in this life ever could. And God, I pray today that someone would in their heart and in their life put down what they're trying to get contentment from because it's chasing after the wind and run to you. God, we love you. We thank you in your holy name. Amen.